In 1941, an 11-year-old boy walked into a stockbroker's office in Omaha, Nebraska, and handed over every dollar he had. It wasn't much, $115 to be exact. He bought 3 shares of a company called Cities Service Preferred. Within days, the stock dropped. He watched it fall. He felt his stomach twist, and he made a promise to himself, right there, that would shape the rest of his life. He would never again let fear make his decisions for him. That boy grew up to control a fortune worth more than $100 billion. But here's what almost nobody talks about. The money was never really the point. The real story, the one hiding underneath 80 years of headlines, is about a man who figured out something the rest of the world still struggles to understand. Patience beats genius, discipline beats luck, and the most powerful force in finance isn't a secret formula. It's time, used correctly, for longer than anyone else is willing to wait. This is the story of how a paper boy from the Midwest became the richest investor who ever lived, and the failures, the near collapses, and the brutal lessons that almost nobody survives. He did. Most people think they already know this story. Rich man, smart stocks, big house, done. But that version skips the part that actually matters. It skips the failures. It skips the years nobody believed in him. It skips the moment his biggest bet in history nearly blew up, live, in front of the entire financial world. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to start, whether one bad decision can ruin everything, whether ordinary people can really build extraordinary wealth without inheriting it, stay with this one, because the answer isn't what you expect. And it comes from a man who, even after becoming one of the richest people alive, still lived in the same house he bought in 1958 for $31,500, Omaha, Nebraska. The Great Depression had just finished tearing through American families like a slow-moving storm. The Buffett household felt every gust of it. Warren's father, Howard, was a stockbroker. His firm collapsed before Warren had even turned 1 year old. There were months when the family wasn't sure how the bills would get paid. That kind of early scarcity leaves a mark. For some children, it creates a lifelong fear of money. For Warren, it created an obsession. He wasn't chasing baseballs in the street like the other kids. He was chasing numbers. By age 6, he was buying 6 packs of Coca-Cola for $0.25 and reselling each bottle for $0.05. A small profit that felt, to him, like a fortune. By 11, he had read every investing book in the local library, twice. While his classmates dreamed about being firemen or astronauts, Warren Buffett stood in front of a chalkboard listing stock prices at a local brokerage and told a friend, quite seriously, that he intended to be a millionaire by 30. Nobody laughed harder than the adults who heard it. And yet, underneath the joke, there was something unsettling about how calm he seemed when he said it. Like he wasn't hoping, he was calculating. By 14, he had saved enough from paper routes to buy 40 acres of Nebraska farmland, which he rented out to a tenant farmer for a share of the profits. Most teenagers spent their money on candy and comic books. This kid was collecting rent. But here's the twist almost nobody mentions. Warren Buffett wasn't a natural-born genius stumbling into greatness. He was, by his own account, socially awkward and anxious, so afraid of public speaking that he once signed up for a Dale Carnegie course just to survive a 5-minute conversation without breaking into a cold sweat. The most confident investor in modern history had to teach himself, painfully, how to talk to other human beings. That detail matters because it tells you something crucial about how this story actually unfolds. Warren Buffett wasn't handed an advantage that separated him from everyone else. He built every one of his advantages by hand, brick by brick, starting from almost nothing. In 1950, a 20-year-old Buffett applied to Harvard Business School. He wanted in, badly. He believed it was his ticket to the world he was trying to build. 10 minutes into his interview, an admissions officer looked at this skinny, nervous kid from Nebraska and rejected him on the spot. At the time, it felt like a disaster. Buffett later called it one of the most painful moments of his young life. But rejection has a strange habit of redirecting people toward exactly where they were supposed to be all along. That failure sent him instead to Columbia Business School, into the classroom of a professor named Benjamin Graham. Graham wasn't just any professor. He was the father of what's now called value investing, a strategy built on a deceptively simple idea. Every stock has a real, underlying worth, separate from whatever number the market slaps on it in a given moment. Sometimes, the market gets emotional. It panics. It overreacts. It prices a company far below what it's actually worth. Graham taught his students to ignore the noise and calculate the truth underneath it. Buy businesses when they're on sale. Ignore the crowd. Let the numbers speak louder than the fear. For Buffett, this wasn't just a class. It was a religion. He was the only student Graham ever gave an A+, and when he graduated, he did something that revealed exactly how serious he was. He offered to work for Graham's firm for free. Graham said no. Buffett went back to Omaha, kept studying, kept waiting. 2 years later, Graham finally called. Buffett packed his bags that same day. He had found his mentor. What he didn't know yet was that he was about to build something that would eventually eclipse his teacher entirely. By 1956, Buffett was 25, married, living in a modest rented home, sitting on savings of about $140,000, real money for the era, but nowhere close to wealthy. That year, he did something almost unthinkably bold for someone so young. He pooled money from 7 family members and friends and launched his own investment partnership. Total starting capital, $105,000. His own contribution, $100. Not because that's all he had, but because he wanted every dollar of profit earned for his investors to come from his skill, not his own capital sitting alongside theirs. It was a statement. Trust me, bet on me, I will make this work. And he did. Over the next 13 years, Buffett's partnership delivered returns that made Wall Street's biggest names look careless by comparison. While the overall market returned roughly 7 or 8% a year, Buffett was compounding investor capital at rates that occasionally topped 20, even 30% annually. He wasn't gambling. He was reading annual reports line by line, hunting for companies the market had misjudged, buying them at a discount so steep it felt almost unfair. Word spread. More investors came knocking. By the mid-1960s, that original $105,000 partnership had ballooned into tens of millions of dollars under management. Buffett had, quietly, without a single flashy headline, become one of the most successful money managers in the country. before most Americans had ever heard his name, and then, in 1962, he made a decision that would change everything, though at the time it looked like just another investment. He began quietly buying shares in a struggling New England textile manufacturer. Its name was Berkshire Hathaway. Here's where the story takes a turn almost nobody expects. Because Buffett's early relationship with Berkshire Hathaway wasn't a triumph. It was a mistake, one he later called the costliest of his entire career. Berkshire was a dying business. Textile manufacturing in New England was being crushed by cheaper overseas labor, and the company's management knew it. In 1964, they offered to buy back Buffett's shares at $11.38 per share, a fair enough exit. Buffett agreed, verbally. Then the official written offer arrived, at a price an eighth of a dollar lower than what they'd promised. Buffett was furious, not because of the money, because of the principle. He felt disrespected, so instead of selling, he did something almost irrational. He bought more shares, enough to seize control of the entire company. He fired the man who'd shortchanged him and took the reins of a dying textile mill purely out of stubborn pride. By his own later admission, this was a catastrophic business decision. He had sunk capital into a sinking ship, driven by ego instead of analysis, the exact opposite of everything Benjamin Graham had taught him. For years, Berkshire bled money. Buffett kept the failing operations running for nearly 2 more decades, watching them slowly die, all because he refused to walk away from a fight. But here's the twist that turned disaster into legend. Buffett stopped thinking of Berkshire Hathaway as a textile company. He started using it as something else entirely, a shell, a vehicle, a financial engine. He poured the cash the dying mills still generated into acquiring entirely different businesses, insurance companies, candy manufacturers, furniture retailers, newspapers. He wasn't trying to save the textile business anymore. He was building an empire on top of its grave. The mistake that should have ended his career instead became the foundation of the largest investment holding company on earth. The 1970s and 1980s were when the world truly began to notice. Buffett acquired a small Nebraska insurance company called National Indemnity, and in doing so, unlocked something extraordinarily powerful, a financial concept called float. Here's the simple version, because this idea is the actual engine behind Buffett's entire fortune, and almost nobody explains it clearly. When an insurance company collects premiums, it doesn't have to pay out claims immediately. That money sits there, sometimes for years, waiting. Buffett realized he could take that pool of idle cash, money that technically belonged to policyholders, and invest it. If the investments performed well, he kept the profits. The premiums essentially became an interest-free loan. Billions of dollars he could deploy into the market while everyone else worked with only their own capital. This was the secret weapon almost nobody talks about. Buffett wasn't just a brilliant stock picker. He had built a machine that gave him access to enormous amounts of cash, cheaper than anyone else on Wall Street could ever get it, and he used that machine to buy stakes in companies that would define American life for the rest of the century: Coca-Cola, American Express, The Washington Post, later Apple. Each purchase followed the same quiet philosophy Graham had drilled into him decades earlier: buy what you understand, buy it when it's undervalued, and then This was the part almost nobody else in finance had the nerve to do absolutely nothing for years, sometimes decades, while the investment compounded in silence. But no story this big comes without a moment where everything nearly falls apart. For Buffett, that moment arrived in 1991, and it had nothing to do with stocks at all. Salomon Brothers, a major Wall Street investment bank in which Berkshire held a massive stake, was caught in a scandal. A trader inside the firm had illegally submitted false bids to corner the market on U.S. Treasury bonds, a serious federal crime, one that threatened to bring the entire institution down and take a huge chunk of Buffett's fortune with it. Regulators were closing in. The bank's reputation was collapsing in real time. Executives resigned. The company teetered on the edge of a total shutdown, one that could have rippled across the entire American financial system. And in the middle of that chaos, at 60 years old, Buffett did something he'd spent his whole career trying to avoid. He stepped in front of the cameras. He became interim chairman of Salomon Brothers and testified before Congress, live, under enormous pressure, with billions of dollars and his own reputation hanging in the balance. If Salomon collapsed, or if regulators decided Buffett had known more than he claimed, it could have ended everything he'd spent 40 years building. He told Congress something that's since been quoted in business schools around the world, a plain, blunt warning to the traders under his watch. Lose money for the firm, he said, and he'd be understanding. Lose one shred of reputation, and he would be ruthless. It worked. Salomon survived. Buffett's reputation, instead of being damaged, was cemented as something rare on Wall Street, a man who would clean up a mess even when it wasn't his to clean. The crisis that could have destroyed him instead became one of the defining proofs of his integrity. By the 2000s and into the 2010s, Buffett wasn't just an investor anymore, he was a symbol. Berkshire Hathaway's annual shareholder meeting in Omaha, once a small gathering in a cafeteria, had transformed into an event drawing 40,000 people, nicknamed Woodstock for capitalists. A single share of Berkshire's Class A stock, the same stock trading around $19 a share when Buffett first started buying it, eventually crossed six figures, then climbed past several $100,000 per share. Let that sink in. An investment of a few $1,000s in the 1960s, left untouched, compounding quietly for decades, would have turned an ordinary saver into a multimillionaire, without them lifting a finger after the initial purchase. That's not a lucky trade. That's the mathematics of patience, playing out over a lifetime. And through all of it, Buffett kept living like the 11-year-old kid who once counted every nickel from selling Coca-Cola bottles. He drove modest cars. He ate at the same steakhouse in Omaha for decades. He never moved out of the house he bought for $31,500. He pledged, publicly, to give away the overwhelming majority of his fortune to charity, rather than pass it down as a dynasty. To a man who had spent his entire life proving that wealth was built through discipline, hoarding it for its own sake apparently held no appeal at all. So what actually separates Warren Buffett from the millions of people who tried to do what he did and failed? It isn't intelligence alone. Wall Street is full of brilliant people who went broke chasing shortcuts. It isn't luck either. Luck doesn't survive 80 years of consistent decision-making. What separates him is something almost boringly simple, And that simplicity is exactly why so few people manage to copy it. He never needed to be right immediately. He needed to be right eventually. And he was willing to wait longer than anyone else at the table. He treated a stock not as a ticker symbol to gamble on, but as a piece of an actual business. He asked himself whether he'd be comfortable owning that business even if the market shut down for 10 years. He avoided debt. He avoided hype. He avoided the constant urge to trade just to feel like he was doing something. And when he made a mistake, and he made plenty, Berkshire's textile purchase among the worst of them, he didn't run from it. He restructured it. He learned from it. He let it become the foundation for something greater. The uncomfortable truth hiding inside this entire story is that almost none of Buffett's core principles are secret. They've been published in his shareholder letters for 60 years, free for anyone to read. The strategy was never hidden. What was rare wasn't the information, it was the discipline to actually follow it. Year after year, decade after decade, while everyone else got impatient and reached for something faster. Somewhere in Omaha tonight, in that same modest house he's lived in since 1958, sits a man worth more than the gross domestic product of entire countries, a man who could buy almost anything on earth, and chooses, instead, to eat the same simple breakfast he's eaten for years, and read the same stack of annual reports he's read every night since he was a teenager. The boy who once watched his first stock purchase drop in value and swore he'd never let fear rule his decisions again, built an empire not through brilliance the rest of us don't have access to, but through a kind of patience most of us never learn to practice. He proved that the biggest fortunes aren't built in a single explosive moment. They're built in the quiet, unglamorous accumulation of good decisions, repeated so many times for so many years that eventually the results look like magic to everyone who wasn't paying attention. It never was magic, it was just time, discipline, and $100 that somebody was patient enough to let grow.